Good evening. Welcome to Cornerstone Home Inspector Education Center. Tonight we have inspecting basements with Stan Poderski. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them at any time. If you're not asking questions, keep your microphone muted so that we have good quality of sound. And this is our last webinar of the year. And we will get through this tonight, and then we have a bunch of exciting stuff coming up next year, which you can see on our website on calendar events. So tonight I'm going to turn it over to Stan, and you're set to go.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I know we're entering the second wave of the holiday season, so this will be our last webinar, as Jim said, so you can spend time spending your hard-earned money on Christmas gifts, Christmas trees, putting up the lights, so on and so forth. So tonight we're going to talk about inspecting basements. To me, the basement is the perfect playground for home inspectors. If someone asked me if I could only inspect one part of a home for them, what would it be? It would be the basement. That, I believe, is where you can give somebody the biggest bang for their buck, even if you couldn't do the rest of the house. The average person can step back and look at the roof and see if it has imperfections. They can walk around the home and probably notice siding or windows in disarray. And a walk through the interior will identify anything out of the ordinary. But the basement is a special place. Inspection of the basement is a very important part of the overall inspection process. It houses mechanical systems, among other things, that must be protected from the elements. Structural problems, water intrusion, termites, plumbing leaks, bad water heaters, faulty heating systems, and unsafe electrical systems are just the start. The basement is where our bread is buttered. So, definition of a basement: the floor of a building which is partly or entirely below ground. A little bit of history. In ancient civilizations, basements were primarily used for storage. They served as spaces to store water, wine, and food. These early basements were often simple cellars located below ground level. During the Renaissance, basements evolved. Wealthy families utilized basement spaces for various purposes. Basements provided an area for cooking. Servants lived and worked in these underground spaces. Basements were used for washing clothes. The concept of basements gained prominence during the industrialization of the United States in the 1950s. Basements transformed into more than mere cellars. They became versatile spaces. Many Americans now know basements as comfortable entertainment spaces. They continue to serve as storage areas. In some regions, basements are converted into habitable living spaces, and basement offices are also very common. There are geographical factors. The use of basements varies based on geographical factors. Wet climates like Great Britain and Ireland may discourage basements due to flooding risks. Basements are standard in places with temperate continental climates. Soil conditions can offer affect whether you want to have a basement or not. Soft soil facilitates basement construction, while compacted soils may pose challenges. And then natural disasters are taken into consideration. For instance, earthquakes may restrict basements, while tornado-prone areas may require them as shelters. Historically, basements were labor-intensive to build. However, industrialization streamlined the process. Modern machinery, such as backhoes and front loaders, reduced excavation time. Materials like terracotta, tar paper, and gravel were used to create moisture barriers and drainage systems. In summary, basements have a rich history, from simple cellars to multifunctional spaces. Whether as storage, living space, or entertainment zones, basements continue to play a significant role in our architectural landscape. So I still see some root cellars out there. I'm sure you guys have as well. Now, mostly forgotten, root cellars were once fundamental to American settlers. Root cellars can be under the house or in a separate building, but either way, they were of great importance to many families from colonial times all the way up to World War II. The modern basement Today's basements are usually clean and usable spaces that can be finished for many different uses. So believe it or not, and this fascinates me, as important a component as it is, the basement is not referred to as a standalone component in any standard of practice. In Connecticut's standard of practice, under structural system, the only mention of the word basement, the inspector shall describe the foundation and report the methods used to inspect the underfloor, crawl space, or basement area. And then they go on to talk about to describe inspect the floor structure, wall structure, ceiling structure, roof structure, and report methods used to inspect the attic. Doesn't say anything about talking about water penetration, dampness, anything of that nature, which I find surprising because standards are supposed to get us all on the same page, and at least in Connecticut, they're supposed to help the consumer more than us. The Florida standards of practice don't mention that word at all in their structural part. And that's kind of to be expected because I'm assuming there's not many basements in Florida. If you will be viewing this as a pre-recorded webinar, you need to report this view code IB406015 to us to get your certificate. Massachusetts, God bless Massachusetts. They do mention the basement floor has to be inspected and reported on. And they note, which I think is a big plus, they have to note signs of previous and or active water penetration into the basement. Now, little things make me happy, and at least that gives new inspectors, I'm sure they're pounded when they're training, but at least it tells them that they have to talk about evidence of water penetration. Jersey, nothing. And Rhode Island also, very similar to Mass. They have to identify the basement floors and note signs of previous and or active water penetration into the basement. But at least in those states, those are the only mentions of a basement. And it's not actually as a component. It's just referred to for a couple of items. So in the basement, you will be describing the foundation materials. Three most popular will be poured concrete, concrete block, and stone. Describing framing materials. So we have different types of framing materials, but we have to be in the basement to actually be able to see those. Couple narratives for framing. So I used to go through a pretty long spiel, the second one there, where visible floor framing consists of wood 2x8 floor joists, 16 inches on center, with the wood cross bridging supported by a built-up wood carry beam and steel alley columns. You could also say that the home is platform framed, and in platform framing, multiple platforms can be constructed on top of the framework. Each platform provides vertical support for each level. In the building construction, in most cases, platform framing is a method of choice, blah, blah, blah. And then you could just be very straightforward and just say the house is wood frame. All of those meet what they require in the standards to describe the framing. But my point is that you have to be in the basement to do that. So that's another task that you perform while you're doing your building, your basement inspection. But I think the biggest issue that most people think of when they talk about basements is water. H2O, the arch nemesis of a home, but the basement specifically. So basements are a hole in the ground and are prone to seepage. Water, humidity, moisture, call it what you want, is the biggest concern for a basement. Miss signs of seepage and you're in big trouble. I was a member of ASHI for probably my first 4 or 5 years. And then when licensing came into effect in the state of Connecticut in 2001, So I guess I was longer in ASHI. I became a member of the Connecticut Association of Home Inspectors. So I had an opportunity to rub elbows with a lot of home inspectors, hear a lot of stories, talk to a lot of these guys. One of the most frequent complaints that inspectors have had over the years was related to basement seepage and water damage. And it's hard to pinpoint unless you talk to people, read their reports. It's hard to pinpoint why these complaints come up. You have to think that you report on whatever you see that you may consider potential seepage outside, the potential for it from the outside, and then what you may see in the inside. But it is one of the biggest, in my opinion. Unfinished basements. Just because they're unfinished doesn't mean you're going to see everything. Obviously, there's storage, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But unfinished basements give you more visible framing foundation to take a look at. Telltale signs. For me, as soon as I walk down the basement, I'm using my nose. So musty odor. If you smell that musty odor, then there's got to be some kind of dampness, evidence of dampness or seepage around someplace. It's a little different than basement smell, in my opinion. Efflorescence on the walls. I think that's a dead giveaway of at least humidity and dampness, if not some degree of seepage at some point in time. Scaling, mainly on stone walls, even bare stone walls, the mortar starts to break down. The walls that are painted or sealed will start scaling off. That's all evidence of dampness and seepage. Stairways. The stairway has been in that wood stairway in 99% of the time has been in that house since conception. So it's been through everything. If it's rotted at the base, that didn't happen from a one-time water entry thing. That's dampness that's existed or seepage that has gone on for a long time. So I always look at the base of the stairway here. Any wood in contact with the ground that has water stains. So damp slabs can wick water up, but in my opinion, this right here is a water stain. You all could see my pointer, right? Okay. Yep. So that's, to me, is a water level stain versus maybe some wicking. There's a few pictures in here that came from the same basement, and I'll try and tie them in. They're not in order. Rust on any piece of metal touching the ground. In this case, this was a finished basement with a metal cabinet. This is a furnace. Again, that rust can climb up that furnace, but I'm thinking there was some water in that basement. Rusted lally columns. This guy's pretty bad. And rotted wood columns. This guy's gone here. So you want to look really close at the bottom of column. So most of them don't look like this, but you'll see water stains, you'll see dampness. You may even see rust climbing up the column as it's wicking in through the concrete. Sometimes you're not going to be able to tell if it's just a damp basement, if there's a water table, high water table around the house, or if it actually had seeped in, but you want to put everybody on notice, in my opinion, anyways. Mold. Mold is sometimes very obvious, like this picture here, even this. So those things hit you right in the face. If you're, again, looking at this as a pre-recorded webinar, you need to report view code IB406030 to us for your certificate. Here's another no-brainer, mold. And I'm not sure you need to be afraid to say mold in this picture, but, and then sometimes it's kind of faint and spotty here a little bit up here. So you do have to be on your on the lookout. If there was any place I would not want to be distracted, it would be the basement. Bulkhead entrances. So they are notorious for seepage. Not that I would want to do all home inspections in the rain, but the rain helps a lot. This one was leaking at the time, so visual is always good. There was some damage on the bulkhead here. You're going to see all different types, right? They'll all be metal, some will be wood, some are a combination of concrete, and some of them are not one piece. They're kind of scabbed together. But if there's a bulkhead entrance in the basement, I put a statement saying that all bulkheads are potential leakage points. So be prepared. Window wells. If you have a window well, a large portion of this soil here and down should be gravel. If you leave material like this in there and it kind of composts, then it prevents the water from getting to the gravel, and it collects water, and then it can leak into the basement window. There's several inches on this one, so it's not huge, but it could happen. And this is what it would look like from the inside as the water pours into the window. So that piece of wood that looked like it had a 14-inch water line on it is in the house with this sophisticated perimeter basement seepage system, waterproofing system. It had the waffle material between the slab. It was cut out all around the perimeter with probably perforated pipe and gravel. This battery backup pump system and this very sophisticated humidifier. One of the things that I've seen over the years, so this is a dead giveaway that they had a moisture problem in the house. This is sophisticated. It's not just a single sump. If this sump pump, if the sump isn't sized properly and the pump doesn't have the capacity to handle the amount of water that may be occurring in this basement, this is all going to fill up. You'll still get dampness up here. As you can see, this is after this system was installed. There's still dampness and water lines on here. It could have failed at one time, the pump, who knows? But I know for a fact that if these aren't sized properly, if that pump doesn't have the capacity to take the volume of water that may come in that house, and it's usually from the water table, then you will still have some dampness. And that's why these humidifiers are in there trying to minimize that. So for me, I have some standard statements that make every one of my reports to cover my butt. So one of them is there are conditions on the exterior of this home that are conducive to basement dampness and seepage. I don't care how small that is, it goes in my report. If it's a dislocated elbow or a missing downspout extension or a slight dip in the grading, anything that puts somebody on notice that they can have dampness or seepage. To minimize potential for basement dampness and seepage, the gutters and downspouts must be kept in proper working order. Surface draining downspouts should be extended away from the foundation. Grading around the entire home should be maintained to slope away from the foundation. The use of a dehumidifier is also recommended. It is advised that valuables be kept off the floor until some living experience has been gained. I don't know what else to tell people. You can point out a dozen things on the outside that can contribute to basement dampness, seepage. Let them buy the house and you drive back 6 months later and tell me how many of those things have been corrected. So you gotta protect your butt with your language. And then last but not least, and this pertains to a lot of flips, if the basement walls are freshly painted and the floor is freshly painted, there was no evidence of chronic or persistent seepage. However, because everything's painted, foundation walls and flooring have been recently painted, which can remove or mask evidence of seepage. This is our report is, and your agreement and your insurance are the only protection that we have. No matter how diligent we are, just as much has to be written in a report to protect ourselves as finding problems in a house. In a basement, we can also find exposed craft paper on insulation. It says right on here, a warning. What more important word can you use? It's flammable and shouldn't be exposed. So I don't care where I find it. If it's in the basement, in the attic, wherever it is, I'm telling people, you got to read that little warning on there and you got to do something about this. Termites. So I know people handle termites differently. For the first, I don't even remember, 10 years of my career, I brought a pest control company to do the termite portion. And they were pretty good, but then they got sold and a new guy came and he just bought businesses. He really didn't know anything about the termite business. They didn't show up, or they came late, and then they would, or if they came early, they'd be all done. And as we were getting there, they would be leaving and go, oh, everything's okay. And I take a step in the basement, the first thing I see is a mud tube. So I said, you know what, if I'm going to screw myself up, if I'm going to get screwed, I'm going to screw myself up. So I started doing them myself. Because we're looking at the same stuff they're looking at, right? We're going to look for decay in those areas. We're going to look for structural issues. Those are the areas that we're bound to see termites. In Connecticut, we had this discussion twice with the Connecticut Association of Home Inspectors and people from the pest control industry about who can do a termite inspection and who can't. And they are still saying, from the last time we spoke, which is now probably almost 2 years ago, that you as a home inspector cannot advise treatment. So when the termite police come and tell me that I can't do that, then we'll see what happens. But so you're going to look for evidence of termite, and the basement is a big area that has to be inspected.
Stan, you can't advise treatment, but you can advise, you can show damage and you can advise further recommendation, right? I mean, like by a termite.
You can handle it any way you want. I'm telling them the house has to be treated to stop the infestation. You can also say, consult the termite contractor. I need a termite contractor to say we got to treat that.
And you can fill out the MPA 33 form.
Yeah, but and I used to, and I actually got a applicator's license to put on there, number to put on there, and nobody was asking for that anymore. Like when I first started, you had to have one of those or you would never get a mortgage, at least here in Connecticut. And then after 2005, when they were just giving money out, they were going on the street going, hey, you want to buy a house? You don't need a down payment. Nobody even asked for those forms, so I stopped using them. I build it right in my report right now.
Gotcha.
And if I can get away with it for about 5 more years, I'll be good.
Do you ever have an FHA come back to you and ask for?
No more.
Okay. All right.
No more. VA, no more.
Okay.
So termites. Powder post beetle, probably not as prevalent in newer homes, or you decide what's new. Probably when we started building with basements and concrete floors that kept the basement drier, these guys that weren't as prevalent. Unfortunately, this is what you see or have to look for, the exit holes. The damage is not always very evident, but in a badly damaged powder post beetle wood, it may look okay, but if you took a good sized hammer and hit it, you'd probably disintegrate it. So basements are usually where we're going to find that. And then carpenter ants. And you're looking for frass and damage. Frass is more prevalent from termites, carpenter ants, where termites actually consume the wood. You're not going to see much. You may see their mud tubes, but you're not going to see stuff like this. So we're looking for wood destroying insects. Other parts of the country, there's a couple other beetles that they are looking for. And if you have carpenter bee damage inside, then you got other problems. So in a basement, most of the home mechanical systems are usually located. They live in the basement. So while we're doing our basement inspection, we are also probably performing other sections of our report, but they do require us to be in the basement. So when the basement floods, so do the mechanical pieces of equipment. This burner was underwater. You can see that water line. It doesn't look like a newer burner, so I don't know if they dried it out, but that's an older style burner that probably existed when that furnace flooded. And this, it ran, for sure. So this is a house on the shoreline in Milford, that this area here was a basement, and then it went up to a crawl space, and the panel flooded up to here. Water got into the base of the panel. The rest of this panel did not have a speck of rust or water stain on it. But this guy was underwater during the hurricane. So these are the kind of things that you may see that are basement related and related to another component of your report. So this is a brand new oil tank, and use this basement window as a reference to this one. I have a better picture from farther away, but for some reason I put this one in here. So there's a low spot right at this window, and if you see, they cleverly put a piece of sheet metal across the window to stop the water from going in there. And it wasn't even caulked at the edges here. So now if you look at this wall on the inside, not only is this low spot a problem here, but that whole wall is got heavy efflorescence. So I'm assuming that the old tank rusted out. This tank had rust on the legs already. So this is an ongoing problem that has never been 100% addressed or corrected. So you can't be fooled by attempts to correct problems when you see evidence that it's probably still going on. Also in this basement was a big water stain right in the center of it and rusted lally columns. So this might not have been as big an issue as the water table, but this basement has a dampness problem at the very least. Underground oil tanks, or evidence of. Some are no-brainers, right? Do you think they left that there to use again? Or is that, hey guys, there's a buried oil tank that has either been removed or still there. And then this one I walked by 3 times, and then I finally said, what are those bottles hanging on? They were old oil lines. So you really got to keep your eyes open. And that's why I said, if there was one place I don't want to be distracted, it's the basement. Now, I think in both cases, oh no, this tank was under a concrete patio and it was still there. And it was abandoned, but the buyer didn't want it. He wanted it removed. And he didn't care about the patio. That deal fell through because they couldn't come to an agreement. And I wound up doing another inspection for this guy. Asbestos, or material that likely contains asbestos, as we like to say in our profession. Pipe insulation, especially damaged or worn like this, big issues. This boiler had asbestos on it, but they attempted to remove it, but there was residual left. Plus, it was still left on the pipes. So it could be on the piping, it could be on the boilers. It could be on ductwork. And this has a very high concentration of asbestos. So normally, at least around here, they just take the ductwork, everything out, and put new ductwork in. But again, this is something that is discovered in the basement, which does not have, is not considered.
The other thing, Stan, go back to the asbestos. I've done inspections where I come in, especially in like West Hartford, You'll come into the basement, it's all ductwork, and it's all got that shiny new insulation all over the ductwork, all over the pipe. I mean, it's brand new in a 1950s house. And I'll come in, I'm like, there's asbestos underneath those pipes. And they're like, how do you know? I'm like, that insulation's too new. They're trying to hide something. And if you slowly peel back, 9 times out of 10. So just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yes, and you know, there were times when I was always criticizing the standards for different reasons. And now I understand why sometimes they are what they are. They're definitely there to help us as well. But the standards say that you don't have to find anything that's concealed or latent. But how far do you go to unconceal something is the question. And now we're bringing in equipment that, like infrared cameras and borescopes and stuff like that, that are pushing us to find things that are concealed. And but asbestos could be hidden. And my report always says, if we, first of all, we don't have to find any of this, but if you tell somebody, no, we're not, if they ask you, are you going to tell me if there's mold in the house or any environmental issue, you can't say no, because they'll just go on to somebody else. I'll say, if I see evidence of it, we'll discuss it. We don't have to test it. And even if I see one floor tile that may have I believe contains asbestos, there could be other asbestos in the house that we can't see. You really got to go above and beyond to cover all the bases, because they'll pick the shit out of you. Most people will read your report, and if you have some caveats, they'll say, oh, well, he covered that. But there's always those people out there that will jump every damn hurdle and pay every penny to make your life miserable. So the more stuff you have in a report to protect yourself, the better off you are. So as floor tiles, that we kind of know from age and size and just the looks can contain asbestos. We'll find that in the basement. Not often, but a lot of times I'll find these spline ceiling tiles in the basement, and a lot of them, depending on their age, contain asbestos and high amounts of it. So they could be in a basement area as well.
Even if you think it's pressboard, huh?
Well, how am I going to know that?
Right.
If I see a spline tile, I'm saying that they may contain asbestos and they should be tested.
Okay.
Because, you know, I've said this 100 times before. I'm looking out for number one, and if I take care of myself, I'm usually taking care of my client as well, whether they know it or not. So basement bedrooms, I see them a lot. So we have to talk about emergency egress, right? This window up here is not, even though somebody could stand on this bed and try and get out of that window, it's not an egress window. This room didn't have any. A house in Milford, fairly new, they built the bedroom in the basement in the area where the exit for the bulkhead entrance was. And they stopped building it and they sold the house. And I was telling they were selling it. And the clients that I was working for, I said, this is not an egress. I said, check with the building department. And sure enough, they told them, look, if that's covered with snow and ice and you know, it prevents you from getting out of here, it can't be considered the egress. So you got to be on your toes with stuff like that. I also lost a realtor because it was a single mom with a couple kids, and she needed the bedroom in the basement that was in the house. And I told her, you can't put your kid down here without making some other egress from that room. So she didn't buy the house, and that was my fault. And I'm sure we've all had stuff like that, right? So restricted items or storage and restricted access in the basement. I don't care if you can see through these shelves or around or underneath. All this in my report is considered restricted access. If there's insulation, I don't have a picture. I should have had one in here. If the joist bays are filled with insulation or the box beams are insulated, you know, you can I'll lift up or poke through some of them near the doorways near the front stoop or the side stoop, but you can't do that to every single one. I mean, you could. I still list them as restricting my inspection. So you remember in the intro to this, basements were used as storage. They certainly were. This basement had multiple problems. Water, big time water. The water main was leaking into the basement. It was a fun one. So finished basements are a different breed, right? So sometimes you go, oh, basement's finished good. There's not much to see. But that in itself is a problem. And we're not going to go through too much about finished basements, but I am going to bring this up. So it could have been even 10 years ago, because, as you get older, you lose track of time. But I was at a CAHI meeting. We all know that defects may be lurking behind finished materials in a basement. Several years back, an inspector stated in a report that his inspection of the basement was restricted by finished ceiling, wall, floor material concealing the slab foundation and framing. The buyer found issues after moving in and filed a complaint that led to court. The judge found the inspector liable and stated he should have also reported what defects may exist behind the materials. So, again, we have to think for other people, and how far do you take that? So now I include the following in my reports. So whatever percentage, approximately 80% of the basement is finished into living space. My inspection of the basement was restricted by finished ceiling, wall, and flooring material, concealing the slab foundation and framing. Exactly what he said up there. Conditions that may exist behind finished walls and ceilings include, but are not limited to, insect infestation, decay, electrical and plumbing defects, mold, improper framing, water damage, etc. What else? I mean, you could go on and on, I guess. Old booze bottles, bags of marijuana. So, but again, that's done in the basement. This poor guy here gives him a headache. So in finished basements, evidence of dampness. When you get to see it, it could be bold mold like that. It could be very little water efflorescence from the slab. Sometimes if you look on an angle at the paneling, you'll see very, very light mold, water damage on the sheetrock walls here, painted concrete. There'll be evidence in that material too. But if you see anything on the exterior that's visible, you really should put some type of statement that there could be additional and more severe damage behind the walls. So from the field with Inspector Clouseau. It's hard enough to predict the future, is it any easier to protect the past? The future, well, it didn't happen yet. There may be things that point to something happening, but does not necessarily mean it will. But the past, on the other hand, may be easier to determine depending on the evidence. So as home inspectors, we must find the evidence and predict the past. Wet basements, for example, unless a basement was cleaned and painted a day before your inspection, there is always evidence. So this sticks out in my mind. I felt bad for these kids. So a case in point, a home I inspected had the following evidence of a wet basement that was discovered and reported on, and of course, pictures to boot. The bulkhead entrance had cracks that were sealed with mortar and caulking. The wood workbench immediately to the left of the bulkhead had plywood applied across the legs, which was severely decayed, as were the 2x4 legs. There was a filled in or abandoned sump pit to the right of the bulkhead entrance. There was a small makeshift sump and sump pump on the right side of the basement near the heating system, an odd spot to say the least, and the floor tiles in the finished area were loose, chipped, and lifting. However, the sheetrock was freshly painted and the baseboard was a plastic material. This was all reported on as being evidence that the basement had a chronic or persistent seepage problem in the past. This is the house where that was going on. The reason why I have this house here is it was the house next door. So these tree limbs here were probably part of this tree. This house was at a higher elevation, not tremendously. This house had a completely finished basement, and there was absolutely no evidence. I did this one 2 years later. This was probably like 19. This was during COVID. There was no evidence of dampness in this basement that I could see. So just because they're next door to each other, they had two completely different things going on. So here are the tiles that were popping in the finished area. This is the bulkhead that was all sealed up and caulked and mortared. There was water in there on the day of the inspection. There was a sump pump here at the base of the bulkhead door. It looks like water, some of it might have went in there, but it looks like it ran past there. New oil tank, again with rusted feet. This is the workbench, the plywood that I could stick my screwdriver through, and the bottom, the base of the legs were also rotted out. This does not happen overnight or one-time water intrusion. This is the new sump behind the water heater and furnace, and it leaked like a sieve and very rusted, like it was underwater all the time. So the buyers of the house in question, or I'm sorry, the buyers of the home questioned the owners who own the home for almost 20 years. They stated that the basement had seepage once after a bad winter when several feet of snow melted in the spring. The buyers took that information as gospel and purchased the home. And by the way, the seller's agent is a nasty woman. The day after they moved in during February, they had significant seepage for days. No rain, very little snow on the ground. So I was asked by a young couple that purchased the home for advice. Their attorney said that it was their job to prove that there was more than a one-time water event. So how does wood decay? It could get wet once and dry out. It can get maybe wet a couple times and dry out. But if it's constantly getting wet, it is going to rot. How can I prove that? Is there a science? Is there a study? I didn't know what to tell them. I said, I will gladly go to bat for you, but I don't have any scientific or facts to base that up out of practicality. And how much are they going to spend to prove that? Are they going to spend the money to fix that basement, make it waterproof? Who knows what was involved in that? So I don't know where that went. And sometimes I don't want to know. So the cost of basement waterproofing. I don't believe all these numbers. I took this off the web, but cost to repair wet basements can vary widely depending on the size of the basement and the complexity of the repair. Labor costs can range from $300 to $1,000, with an average cost of $7,050 for a 1,000 square foot basement experience mild to moderate water damage. Waterproofing a 1,000 square foot basement costs an average of $3,000 to $10,000, but that asterisk depends on a lot of things there. Total project cost depends on your home's location, the size of your basement, and how you waterproof it. The larger your basement, the more materials and labor are needed for waterproofing. Waterproofing a basement interior typically costs less than waterproofing the exterior. Some waterproofing materials cost more than others, and waterproofing costs more in flood-prone areas. Professional contractors may charge by the job or per hour. So, dampness in a basement is a costly thing if you try to correct it. There's methods of waterproofing. So on the interior, forget these numbers. I don't believe they are accurate. Epoxy ejection, you've all seen cracks that have these little tubes that they fire in that epoxy. I'm going to say that would be the beginning of a trial and error. Is the entire basement problem from those cracks, or are we starting with the small stuff and getting bigger? Interior French drain installation, that's usually tied to a sump pump. Sealant, interior and exterior, sealing the walls on the outside and the inside. Sump pump installation, vapor barriers, exterior French drain installation, excavation on the outside to get the cracks to seal them. Gutter installation, first thing you should do if they're bad or you don't have any. Underground downspouts for the gutters, window wells, yard grading. So a lot of different things, and everybody's going to sell you how they want to do things. Contractors can charge up to $34,000 to finish a basement, with the average labor cost being 10% to 25% of the overall project cost. Keep in mind that labor prices tend to be higher in densely populated urban areas where living costs are much higher than in more rural areas. So it's funny because I live in Milford, and if you go, a lot of contractors go to Fairfield County because they get more money. So the better contractors from down this area do a lot of work in Fairfield County, only because they can charge more. But they're paying more to go back and forth because they sit in traffic for hours, maybe, yeah, even in the morning, depending on what time they leave. So, you know, there is a price for everything, but this is definitely a true statement. So in conclusion, missed water intrusion into a home can be a huge liability to a home inspector based on the cost of waterproofing and the cost of recovering or rebuilding due to water damage, mold abatement, etc. While there is a lot going on in the basement, home inspectors must perform their inspection of the area with due diligence. Any sign of dampness or water intrusion on the inside must be reported on, no matter how small or insignificant it may be. So again, that's covering your butt. You know, sometimes people are so excited to buy a house that they may not, even though they're shaking their heads, yes, they may not be comprehending everything you're telling them. Usually water scares the bejesus out of people, and they may pay a little bit more attention when you start pointing out things that are proof of seepage. And then of course, if it's wet or there's standing water at the time of inspection, that's golden. And that does happen, not often, but it does happen. So any little thing that you think could be an issue, you need to put in your report. We all know, if you've been in this business long enough, that they're going to pick on a lot of stuff, just like Jim's story. There, you know, in Connecticut, I'm going to say most times the people are at the inspection. I wouldn't want it any other way. I have an opportunity. They see me in action. I have an opportunity to no matter how well you write in your report, that discussion, looking at a problem, to me is huge. But you can't talk about it and then not put it in the report. You need to make sure you get this stuff down. It's just from years and years of seeing people shelling out money or going to their insurance company because of water coming in a basement. And the sad thing is, if they reported on it or didn't report on it strong enough, they're not getting this right. They're not getting the idea of the home inspection. It's not just finding problems and saying, hey, you got a water problem. You really got to report everything, because that's going to help you in the long run if these people don't act upon what we tell them. So we have holidays coming up. I know we're a little early, 7:49. Anybody have any questions? No.
Good. Excellent.
Jim, we're good to finish
We're
up.
good to stop. Yeah, we got 50 minutes in, so I think we're good.
So have a happy holiday, guys. I hope the new year starts off a little better than the last couple of years. I think it's going to be a little while before we see an aggressive increase in listings and stuff like that. But hopefully we're on the right track, that we'll get this ball rolling again. So enjoy the holidays. Spend a lot of time with your family. Have a few drinks. If you drink bourbon, think of me while you're throwing it back. I'll be thinking.